In the last video about Miles, I said the only version of him that's actually good is in the first Spider-Verse film, and I stand by that, with me saying that the sequel is just not as good. It's every criticism of the character rolled into one movie. Watch that video for more context, but people keep telling me that Miles in Spider-Man PS4, Spider-Man 2, and his own game are good renditions, and I disagree. The core of Miles was created during a time when diversity was prioritized over good writing, and because of that, he can never truly grow without being completely remade. Into the Spider-Verse tries to do that, but even it eventually conforms to the same shallow traits the writers always fall back on for him. These traits bleed into every version of Miles because he, at his core, is there to replace Peter when he is introduced. He stays at the same level whenever he's introduced in terms of what Spider-Man is supposed to be, so if you want to make a Spider-Man story where they're both Spider-Man, you have to include Miles, and that's just not really feasible, which actively takes away the spotlight from Peter if you want to tell a story about Peter, but Miles is present in the verse, because they occupy the same space narratively, where they're meant to be grounded heroes. However, it seems that Miles, whenever he's in a story, is desperately written to be in the spotlight because no one actually cares about him because he's not interesting. Let's take a look at Across again for a second time. They turn the fan favorite alternate universe version of Spider-Man, found in 2099, into the main villain, then made every Spider-Man we grew up with into his lackeys, and has Miles turn against him based on morals that every Spider-Man has already learned. This is just blatant and undeniable. It's contrived and manipulatively written, and no amount of pretty animation can hide that this movie is the embodiment of every criticism of Miles Morales. And it doesn't just stop there. If you're going to have Miles in a story, you have to commit to him not being Spider-Man until you figure out how to write Peter out. Otherwise, you can't develop Miles or Peter properly since, as I mentioned before, their stories are intertwined due to the nature of the Spider-Man mantle and how desperate writers are to have Miles be liked. Spider-Man 2 doesn't commit to telling the story that they want to tell with Peter, and the game suffers for it, and the reason why they won't commit to it is because Miles is present at all. Miles as a character is disliked because the writers bend the world to make him likable instead of just writing him that way. They make him stand out too hard next to Peter with his personality basically having no fault because, again, he has to be written to be liked, as well as just making him overpowered to the point of absurdity. Let's list his powers. Super strength, spider sense, wall crawling, that's fine, but invisibility, electricity absorption, and projection. He can construct creations from electricity like he's fucking Green Lantern. He's given flight from electricity like he's Iron Man, a literal electric Kamehameha. And at what point do we stop and think maybe he's too strong to be fighting bank robbers? He's not Spider-Man. He doesn't have the things that make Spider-Man unique. He doesn't have the personality to be Spider-Man, where he has character faults that make you actually want to watch him learn and grow. He is basically just an OC that has been legitimized. It doesn't make sense to me. In other videos, I said that you can change things about the character. If the core traits of the character are the same, then who cares about the changes? But Miles is always written in a way that the core traits of the character are used as manipulation rather than actually trying to tell a story. And the things that they changed about him make him not fill the same role that they want him to fill. Peter is a good moral person, but he has faults that are established in his very first issue that carry forward in every rendition of the character. Miles doesn't, and that's just because the writers have to make him liked despite his existence being there to replace the character we actually like. He can't be too different because he's meant to replace Peter, because if he's too different and you risk him being unlikable by having his personality traits be flawed, then you've basically replaced the character for no reason and risk people pushing back against it because they don't like him compared to the other person. But that was always the inherent risk whenever you make somebody take over the mantle and try to force him in literally every piece of Spider-Man media coming out since his inception. You just can't have your cake and eat it too with Miles. And because he's bland, writers keep giving him random stories where he takes other people's powers to prove he has personality, but he just doesn't. Peter sometimes gets these power-up stories too, but Peter's stories on their own are good, so they stand out as gimmicks rather than like actual things that you're supposed to point to. But Miles' stories are entirely gimmicks that don't actually matter because they're hollow. again, why do I want to watch a guy who realistically shouldn't have any problem with villains due to his powers and never be tested personally because he's essentially infallible when compared to what Peter Parker actually is? Spider-Man's faults would never allow him to let an infinite amount of people die in Across the Spider-Verse, but because Miles is desperately written to be liked, we have to position him to be the one to make the obvious observation based on morals every Spider-Man should have learned by now. Miles has never had a good story outside of Into the Spider-Verse, and that movie is good because it commits to a story where Miles is not Spider-Man for a large amount of the runtime. He's being mentored to take over in a world where Peter doesn't actually exist. However, when we put him into a story where he is Spider-Man, the flaws of the character in terms of how he's written when compared to the other Spider-Man and the meta around that still exist and are pushed. These flaws are present in the overall narrative of his story in Spider-Man 2, but I want to focus on gameplay first because I want to relate this back to the powers discussion earlier in the video and how writers desperately need them to feel similar, even though they're not. Hey, I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year, currently halfway there. So if you like the video so far, then please subscribe. My packaging isn't good, but YouTube keeps pushing my content with thousands of impressions, and I'm just not generating a lot of clicks. As one of the lucky few to click on a poorly packaged video, then subscribe. Leave a comment telling me how to improve the thumbnails and other things like that. It will be greatly appreciated. Now back to the video. Miles' overpoweredness bleeds into gameplay in Spider-Man 2 to a distracting degree, and his story is not connected enough to Peter's to make him actually have a reason to be there. The devs wanted to shoehorn him into Spider-Man 2, so he shares the spotlight with Peter. In Spider-Man PS4, Peter was perfect, just needed a little refinement in terms of gameplay, but everything about that version of the character was really good. But in the sequel, they didn't want to show how much stronger Miles is, so they gave Peter his superior Spider-Man legs to make him play basically the same as Spider-Man. And at that point, it really does begin to feel like the people making this game don't understand or understand all too well the criticisms of Miles as a character. Miles is too overpowered and doesn't feel like Spider-Man. Instead of allowing the audience to come to conclusions about the two different Spider-Men, one who uses gadgets in his brain and the other one who has plot powers, they decided to make them functionally identical in terms of gameplay because they couldn't risk the players coming to the conclusion that is just natural when you compare them side by side. Thanks for making it feel like Miles is replacing Peter even more. We actually cared about Peter in the first game and wanted to see more of him rather than Miles. No one gives a shit about Miles. He gets literally all his credit from 2 movies, and I really cannot understand why they keep trying to force him into media. The narrative of his own game, when left to his own devices, like every other rendition of the character besides Into the Spider-Verse, made me even less excited to play as him in the sequel because it proved to me that he just shouldn't be here. He shouldn't exist in this world. I don't care about his friend betraying him because we never actually get to see their relationship. And that's not just to say that the game is poorly written, but the whole plot line is stupid. They can't come up with something interesting about Miles in this verse, so don't even include him if you can't do that. Wait until he's ready to have a story that he can carry on his own rather than including him just because he's present at all. But you have to include him because, again, they occupy the same narrative space as grounded heroes. It wouldn't make sense for Spider-Man to be mentoring Miles but him not be present whenever the Peter-centric story is being played out in front of us. But instead of just writing him out of the story, they actively have to include him, but they don't know how. So why even bother? They should have just told the story that they tried telling about grief and revenge in his own game and devote the entire game to that, and let the sequel to the first game be solely about Peter. Write Miles out of the way of the story the same way that they wrote Peter out in his own game, and have the third game be something new that they have to tackle together as a duo and have them both be invested in the plot equally. I have no idea why people don't know how to make Miles actually interesting. I mean, I do, but I feel like writing a new story with a character that's essentially a blank slate is easier than figuring out how to write for a character that has existed since the 60s and make something memorable or interesting. As it is now, Miles is boring and seems to be forced to be that way. I can't stand him. I genuinely just can't. In every iteration, he's either boring or manipulatively written to be more favored, and I just don't like that. Narratively, Miles steals the spotlight from Peter in Spider-Man 2 just by existing. In the first game, Peter's arc was emotional and brilliant, choosing between Aunt May or the the city hit hard. In the sequel, Peter goes through another gut-wrenching journey, but now Miles is here doing lame missions because he has to be included, since again, they take up the same narrative place as grounded heroes. And he was set up in the first game even though he literally didn't have to be, because he was just culturally relevant at the time. Does Miles need to be shoved into every piece of Spider-Man media? I don't think so. He's a bland character who only gets credit because of 2 movies and gets carried in the games that he's in by Peter Parker. I really just don't get it. I'm trying to watch Peter fend off alien possession, turn on his friends, and wrestle with the emotional turmoil of seeing his friend depend on an evil symbiote. Meanwhile, Miles is struggling to write a 500-word essay about himself, can't seem to figure out how to do that for some reason, as well as being fearful that his friends are going to turn on him. Something literally not supported in the game at all. Even his side missions are cooler than the main ones in Spider-Man 2. Miles has nothing to do with the main plot. I do not know why he's here. He's consumed by the Revenge is Bad curse, even though he never brought Lee up in his own game. In Spider-Man 2, he has one line connecting him to the main villain and a phone call. Why is he here? He is taking up narrative time that should be used to allow us to build the story with Peter, and as such, Peter's story just feels rushed and contrived. We do not need Miles telling Spider-Man he's loved when Peter fighting off alien possession would make more thematic sense. The symbiote is anger and rage personified. It's supposed to corrupt you until you cast it off, playing into the themes of how those traits are bad and require personal effort to get over. But instead, we get Miles telling Peter he's cool and loved, and it's more like Miles is talking to himself due to Miles's arc being about abandonment. It's lame and doesn't actually mean anything thematically, because it has nothing to do with Peter in this story. And Miles's own subplot about fearing abandonment makes no sense. There is no indication his friends would leave him. Meanwhile, Peter has literally lost so much in this verse, not just with what we have seen, but also what is implied, that he feels that he's not a good enough Spider-Man because of what he has lost. Asking the question of, if I was a good enough Spider-Man, would I have been able to save everyone? And again, he's present in Across the Spider-Verse saying that he doesn't need to save everyone and that he needs to let an infinite amount of people die. It doesn't make sense. But in this game, that's an actually good starting point from an arc. That is a good question to have an arc be delivered. But him finishing the story by saying that he's going to give up the mantle to Miles makes no sense and is contrived whenever you actually think about what the game is trying to tell you as a player. He goes on a journey where he's asking himself whether or not he's a good enough Spider-Man, gets possessed by an alien that actively makes him go against all of his friends and pushes him to abandon them even further to try to be a better Spider-Man, and his conclusion to all of that is to give up the mantle? Hello? It's just bad writing, and for some reason it gets praised because Miles is in it and he's not overtly bad like he is in every other rendition of the character. It also feels like Peter has to be nerfed to make Miles look better. Yes, earlier I said that Miles is OP when compared to Peter, but Peter is more experienced. Instead of letting Peter pack up bad guys easily like he should be able to, the narrative forces him to be stupid so Miles can prove himself and learn. Like the Rhino chase scene in Miles' spin-off game. Peter suddenly forgets how to be Spider-Man so Miles can shine. I really don't get how Peter is having trouble subduing the Rhino when he has super strength and fought every single one of the Sinister Six at the same time and held his own longer than against the weakest member of the team in that game. It's just forced. Like, I get that he loses, but it's just forced. It's hollow, and it's everything wrong with how modern writers write legacy characters with new age heroes trying to be implemented. The new heroes are almost always dog shit, or they're used to tell the audience why they should like the new heroes coming up. It's just infuriating. Miles does not elevate Spider-Man. He dilutes the character. He's not the next evolution of the hero. He's the corporate mandated distraction that keeps Peter from actually having great stories whenever he's around. Or it actively ruins characters that we like by simply being near him, like 2099 or 616B Spider-Man found in the Spider-Verse movies. I mean, Across literally has Peter being dummied down and every other character in that film act like an idiot just to elevate Miles. Why does Peter bring his baby to a dangerous super prison? Why is he bringing his baby to an industrial area where she can fall just so he can talk to Miles? It just doesn't make sense. He's encouraging her at like 3 or 2 years old to swing around with web shooters? I mean, hello? It's just dumb. I likely won't make another video about Miles until Beyond the Spider-Verse comes out, and just to see like how they handle the plot point of the canon. It's meta in a bad way, and I hate it. I get Miguel is supposed to be wrong, and that all the information that he has as a character makes sense for him to draw those conclusions, but everything surrounding the plot point is designed to be meta, and it's poorly written when you take the meta into an account. This game series is basically everything wrong with the character wrapped up into one coherent example as how he functions narratively, rather than what the Across team was trying to do by exploring that in a meta way. If you're interested in more videos like this, then subscribe. The next big review will be Skyrim. I haven't actually started working on that, even though I've made like 5 videos saying that that's what I'm going to work on. I opened the game, played like You're Finally Awake, and then closed it, and I haven't touched it since. I will devote like a week to actually trying to play it and go through it, and then that video will hopefully be out by the end of the month. I'm just focusing on a lot of stuff, schoolwork, and these videos are easier to make than playing another RPG right now. Also, I've put this in the comments of a lot of videos, but I'm going to make the Discord public whenever I reach the goal of 500 subscribers so that you guys can actively give me media that you want me to consume and give my opinion on. But I'm done. I'll let you guys go.